have entered the realm of dead air. For the next 2 hours, you will be transported into the world of the strange and the supernatural. You might not feel the need to cleanse your laptops or mobile devices afterwards. But it might not be a bad idea.
Jumping right into it. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. This is Dead Air Live on the Dead Air Full Spectrum channel. On our Sunday night show, we are now in April. Quarter of the year is already gone. Now we're in April. Hope you had a good April Fool's Day. I hope nobody paid or played too many horrible jokes on you. But thank you guys for joining us. We are here, and we've got a special show for you tonight. With me, as always, Mr. Ken DaCosta. And Ken, how are you doing this evening, sir?
I'm doing great. My only April Fool joke yesterday was about 7 o'clock in the morning when my 5-year-old grandson threw a rubber snake at me while I was in bed. And it's one of those gummy ones that sticks to you. So I had this thing walking around on my forehead for about 5 minutes, So I got right into it. I committed to it.
You didn't panic or anything.
Yeah. So
that's the important part. That is.
Yeah.
We are
a man of my age. You can't do stuff like that because, it's the heart.
A man of your age, you can't get out of bed too fast.
Well, Jesus and I both said that when we were teenagers.
Absolutely. We are simulcast with KGRADB.com, KGRA on Facebook and on YouTube. Remember to hit that subscribe button. Also, the thumbs up for our content and the reminder bell for all the different shows that we provide for you here and more to come right here on Dead Air Full Spectrum. Now, tonight, I think you guys are going to love this. This is going to be exciting because we're talking about the paranormal, which we love, but we're also talking about film. And this is something that is really close to my heart in the sense of what these gentlemen are achieving, what they are attempting to provide for us, and where this may go. So, Ken, I know you wanted to bring something up about this as well. Go ahead.
Yeah, I love the idea that this is a 6-year project that's came to fruition. And Ross and Chad, along with director Billy Lewis, decided to share it with us as they tried to do something that we talk about quite often on this show. And that is pushing this field forward, whether it's by trial and error or thinking outside the box. These type of things are always welcome in this field because we have a tendency to fall back on our theories and conventional thinking when it comes to the paranormal. And it's fine to incorporate those things into what we do, but let's, without further ado, bring our guests on. Ross Allison and Chad Goodwin's new documentary, ParaSense, The Naked Experiment, has taken ghost hunting to a whole new level by exploring how the sense of touch relates to hauntings. And their subjects do it all in the nude. So let's get into that. It's a 90-minute documentary that explores the physical aspects of ghosts actually touching the living. So without further ado, Ross and Chad, welcome to Dead Air.
Thanks for having us.
Wow. It's an interesting concept with a lot of brave volunteers, present company included in that circumstance. But why don't we start this off with you, Ross, for our viewers, and how did this concept come about?
Well, what had happened is, like I said, it's been over 6 years now for us, but a young man had contacted me from Northport, Washington, and he said that he was doing some construction work in an old brothel. And during that time when he was alone, he felt something grope him. And from there, he had these sensations because he lived right next door to this brothel, and he felt that there was some female presence that kept, engaging on him. Now, this is not the first time I've ever heard anything like this. There's been hundreds of thousands of documented cases where people have been physically attacked by
Mhm.
ghosts or touched in various different ways. But for me, again, this was just another personal experience that I just have to take their word for.
Right.
And it really got me thinking. It's just like, well, how could you prove such a personal experience? And so I started digging and digging, trying to find out if anybody had ever done any experiments that I could use to, pursue this research. And no one had ever done it. And so I found myself being the first person to actually trying to take on this challenge of trying to prove touch. And from there, I just started come up with some unique experiments, and I was getting interesting results, but nothing that was enough for me to put it out there in the public and say, "Hey, here's proof that ghosts touch you."
Mhm.
And so I reached out to Chad, and I'll let Chad kind of talk a little bit about how he got into the project.
Well, I had a radio show for a while, so I had met Ross years ago before this, like 2016, 15, 16, and he called me up in 2019 and was like, "Hey, if you were going to sense touch, how would you do it?" And I threw out a couple of ideas. I just had some off the top of the head stuff, and he's like, "That's what I'm doing. Why don't you come join me?" And I was like, awesome, let's do it. Let's see what we can come up with. At first I was a little bit like, I didn't know exactly, as a scientist, it's a field that's kind of untapped by science, like, legit rigorous science. But I just jumped in with him and said, let's go see what we can find.
Well, you know what's amazing about this documentary too is you actually get to see someone's raw journey into the paranormal, such as Chad. He starts from the very beginning. He wasn't sure about this stuff, and then you get to see his own personal experiences and things that help him along the path as well.
Yeah.
Right.
Chad,
Well, that was one of the interesting things I was talking before the show, how he came into it organically as not someone who had any preconceived ideas. He came into it as a man of science. So, it was pretty much a clean slate for him. So everything that you witnessed and everything that he do was a learning process where you guys kind of exchanged information and educated each other.
Right.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, the first few things that I had done with Ross, I mean, the idea of what we were like experiencing kind of blew my mind a little bit, because I was still like, is this really happening? Like, is this real? Is this what's, you know? And then as we had more and more experiences, then I was able to figure out what it was I was looking for. And with all of the work he had done, he had a bunch of empirical evidence and all these great experiments that he was doing. It just made sense to couple up what he was doing with what I know and put them together.
Right.
well, you're talking about developing this idea, this concept, and deciding that you're going to utilize this. That's great. I think there are teams out there all the time that are trying to think outside the box. Hopefully they do, and they're not socially programmed and stick with K2s and flashlights. You've gone in a completely unique direction here, and yet it also became something that had to be, thank goodness, and turned into a film. How did that come about?
Well, like I said, I've been doing these experiments for over 6 years, and I was just focused on recording the data, recording the experiments, because I wanted to see, if I could validate these encounters. I never really thought of doing a documentary. So that was the challenge of all this, is because we had years and years and hundreds of experiments that we had done throughout the years, and trying to tell a story and watch the data and the science grow along with us as individuals, me and Chad. And that was a big challenge because, again, we weren't looking at filming b-roll or doing all these interviews that would have been nice to have as you start to put all this information together. But luckily, as we started, as once Chad got on board and we started to realize the big discoveries we were making, if you are going to be a researcher, you have to publish your research no matter what. And I know a lot of people are afraid of it, because you're afraid people are going to steal your research, but you got to get out there. Otherwise, your research is gone when you're gone.
Yeah,
So-
I mean, science is made to be built upon, right? I mean, that's how we come up with all of this technology. Somebody does something and there's reiterative, work done on it, more invention put into it. And so for us to be able to show this stuff, I hope people start actually doing this, like this kind of rigor and data collection, because that's what's going to be, I think, really important for pushing forward the research and figuring out what this is.
I know Ken's got a lot of questions. And you got to understand, Ken has been a paranormal investigator since the time that they were still burning witches. It's been a long time.
I remember.
So he's got a
You look good
lot,
for your age.
and he's one of the most knowledgeable in the field, bar none. He's fantastic. But before I turn that over to Ken, my question is, what is the experiment? What exactly is happening to the individuals and yourselves when you're doing these investigations with this equipment? Kind of explain that to everybody.
Well, I think one of the things that we should address first is the nudity. People have often asked us, why naked subjects? And if you're trying to prove touch, you have to see what is happening to the physical body itself. Is there anything happening to the skin, to the muscles? And when people wear clothes, unfortunately, that becomes contaminated evidence. Because if somebody says, oh, I felt a hand on my back, and they're wearing a shirt, anybody in the scientific field is just going to roll their eyes at you and say, unfortunately, you have no validated proof of that experience, because it could have been the clothes themselves that you're wearing. I have to admit, there's been times I felt like something tapped me on the shoulder, and I have to second guess it because, maybe it was just my jacket. So we had to eliminate all that. And so nudity just made sense. If you're going to put them in this environment where physical phenomena happens, you need to see what is actually happening to the physical body. So that became a big part of the experiments.
Right. Not to clarify, you are not promoting that all investigators in the paranormal field now should do their investigations butt naked.
No,
It should be for certain experiments.
Nobody needs that.
Yeah, we don't need a bunch of naked ghost hunters out there now.
I'm retiring as of today. Then, if that's it.
And then the really great thing about using that as your thing is the human body has always been the primary sensor for this kind of phenomena, right? So if I was to set up a bunch of sensors in a space and try to record it, if something happened, I wouldn't be able to actually relate it to anything or correlate it to anything. So having that person there while we're collecting the data helps us validate what the person's feeling. But hopefully down the road, when we get enough data and we have big enough data sets, then we'll be able to also be able to look at a space and see if there are things that we can pick out and say, hey, something happened there. But it's going to take us some time, and it's going to take, a lot of data collection to get to that point. Yeah. And one of the things we make sure we always do is a baseline. So the sensors sit in the space and record. That allows us to find anything that could be rhythmic in the space with EMF or any other part of the sensors, and allow us to see that the sensors are working correctly before we actually start doing our experiments. Yeah. And then everything we do is time-stamped, and we're going fast. We're in the low milliseconds, just ripping through, trying to get as much data as we can.
Well, one of the things, too, that we should point out is, the biggest failure in ghost hunting today is people jump on just one little device, one little reading. EMF detector goes off and, it's paranormal. They fail to collect multiple points of data to validate one encounter. And that has been our main focus is, you have a subject in the room and hopefully they're feeling something. And of course, Chad's collecting the data, and hopefully that data can validate at the same moment that they felt something, that something was going on. And then hopefully, you get something else that happens in the room to validate that, maybe an EMF or EVP happening in that area. Mm-hmm. So having those multiple points of data are so important to validate that one encounter. And most ghost hunting shows don't even do that. They just depended on one.
Right.
We try to have multiple points of data.
Yeah. In the paranormal field, we call it compounding. You're compounding your evidence. So you're not just going off of one experience.
Exactly.
Ken?
Yeah, and a lot of it is using it in the right way, because most EMF meters, that they're not designed to detect ghosts, but they're calibrated to the North American level of megahertz, which I think is 45 in North America. I think it's 55 in Europe. So if you're looking for a haunted microwave oven, that's your tool. So you've got to corroborate it in terms of the effect on the general environment. What I wanted to start off was asking Chad really quick. Now, you're coming to this again, like I say, you don't ghost hunt, but it sounded like an intriguing idea to you. Do you think that science is somewhat lacking? I understand the hesitancy for scientists to jump into this because of peer pressure and because they don't want to be associated with something that in their minds is unprovable. But do you think that basically science needs to take a little bit more of an interest in this type of thing because it is widespread? It's been happening for a millennia. People do have these experiences. Not everybody's a crank. Certainly, people misidentify things. It doesn't necessarily mean they're making up stories or hoaxing. But as someone who gave up a long time ago on trying to prove to science what we have, how do you feel the scientific community can do a little bit better with this type of thing, or is that even possible?
It's pretty interesting. So I've been heavily thinking recently, kind of leading up to the release of this, about what is nothing, right? Like, what is nothing? We think of nothing. If something happens, but it's not, nothing's there, then nothing could have happened, right?
Right.
But it's obvious that nothing is something. If you think about the definition and how we use nothing, nothing's something. And so I think what is kind of missed here is that it's perhaps that one, to do this as a scientific, this is definitely a passion project, right? This isn't something that's going to likely make us money unless we had a show, or it isn't going to make us money unless, whatever. So I think when you think about scientists, unless someone's really passionate about this, it's a little bit hard for them, I think, to get into it and be passionate about it and put the time in.
Yeah.
Secondly, it's such a nebulous right now, even for me, for what we've done. It's obvious we've picked up some things on some sensors, but not things on other sensors. And so you have to be willing to go down this path to figure out what works, what doesn't work. If something happens to a person and we catch something, but then something happens that it doesn't, how do we correlate that? And it's really confusing right now. There's nothing to really start from that's really concrete and solid. There's like some work that Barry Taff has done that we could look at, and there's some work that some other people like that have done. But when you really think about it, this is a pretty fresh thing to tap into from a strictly scientific perspective.
Well, I think that there has to be a distinction because a lot of the groups out there, Ross can speak to this, they've been around a long time. They like to use the term, we approach things scientifically. And sometimes I think we conflate using technology with being scientific. I'm going to give you a Lloyd Auerbach quote: just because I have a microwave doesn't make me a scientific cook. That's a Lloyd comment. And
we love Lloyd.
So that's the thing. I mean, you conflate those two things. Now, Chad, you are a scientist. You are trained in that. I am not a scientist, nor am I a psychologist, nor am I a demonologist. I'm not any of those things. I think more in terms of documenting things. But I think that distinction has to be drawn with people who talk about science, and that comes to a question I wanted to ask about the scientific method, because I love to get into this. And you talk in this documentary about applying the scientific method. Did you find after this whole project was done that the scientific method can be applied, or do you think just elements of the scientific method can be applied, especially when you're dealing with something as volatile as people who are, we'll call them spirits? But if we take our personalities to the other side, I mean, we're volatile creatures to begin with. We're in good moods, bad moods. We show up, we don't show up. We have good days, bad days. So I would imagine with dealing with the human spirit or the human consciousness, it's hard to get a something to replicate itself the same way. So how do you kind of feel about applying the scientific method to this, and to what degree?
Well, I think the scientific method, in my eyes, works. And so it started, I started, and we tried to document that very clearly. The first thing was to figure out what it was I was trying to look for, because without a pretty general good assumption about what it is I'm looking for, what I'm looking to achieve, it's really hard to start finding a way to do that. So me going out and experiencing some of those things, feeling it, seeing some of the data that was being collected, started to allow me to figure out, okay, these are the things people are feeling. And there was a few things I wanted to do, and a few new things that'll come up in the next documentary about collecting more information on the person. But being able to use what Ross had already been doing, which was a great method. He had quite a few of the elements in there. He was journaling his stuff. He was collecting data from computers while he was, watching people, and he was going through all that. The only real last thing that needed to be done was figuring out how to collect more data instead of single point data. And that's where things start to open up, and when we make 4 of these units and we put them around people, then you get a better view than if you just have things going in one direction. Right. And so that was really what it was figuring out how to take what Ross was already doing, what I had experienced, and then how to multiply that out to make more data collection. If there's anything you could always want, it's to collect as much data as you can. Right. And then, when you think about the putting the method into this too, in such a, like we said, new, fresh thing to be doing this like this in, then you start having to figure out what works and what doesn't work, like I said earlier. And then we have to take out things that don't work. We need to say, okay, if certain sensors are working, what other certain sensors in that range? What does that mean? And are there chemical things that are happening in the air? So we have to do that. Are there pressure things? Because I felt a lot of pressure on my body in some of those experiments. And then it just keeps rolling and rolling and rolling. And right now there's more ideas for experiments that I want to do than what we have time for. So we have a lot of documentaries to shoot.
By all means, go for it. And what I wanted to ask Ross here is that right at the beginning, something was introduced that I think would fascinate some of our viewers. And that's the idea of going into the metaphysical realm with this variation of Kirlian or aura photography.
Yeah.
When you applied that. So people who watch this will see a little bit more what I'm talking about, but I wanted you to kind of unpack that a little bit, because I found that really interesting, because normally we see it done at paranormal conferences or in a studio somewhere, but to take it out into the field, boots on the ground, and use it at a haunted location, I thought that was kind of unique and probably kind of useful. So unpack that a little bit for us, how that came to be.
Well, again, this is before Chad had come into the picture. So for me, I'm trying to figure out what's happening around the environment. And I've always been intrigued with the Kirlian technology. And for me, it was trying to figure out what's happening around the environment around the subject. Because if you got somebody just sitting there, you want to see what's happening around them, if there's anything that could be captured. And if you're not familiar with, Kirlian photography, this is where, they claim that it's capturing your aura, that it'll show the different lights, the different extremes,
right,
depending on the subject in front of the camera. And I thought, well, what if you use that in an environment where you're hoping that somebody could be touched? Because I talked to Shannon, and she was like, yeah, when things get in the environment, she says, like, if somebody walks up to her subject while she's doing the readings, there's these black spots that show up.
Yeah, it was
and cool. I thought, okay, that's interesting. So when somebody comes up to that subject during this process, something does affect the environment. And so that's when I started taking it out on ghost hunting and started to see, when we were doing these experiments, that those black spots were showing up at the same time people were being touched. And so that was amazing to me. And in fact, I think that was one of the groundbreaking pieces of evidence that swayed, Chad to join, because he experienced it firsthand.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And this were the kind of deal where the person might have known that this particular camera was on them, but I don't know if you kind of did it like a blind study where it's like, okay, we're just going to put this camera on you, just act normally. So whatever they're saying, I feel a presence here or something, without knowing that what it is that you're looking at on the other end of this, saying, oh, they I guess they kind of look like cones, is the way I described them, or whatever, coming out of the body. So that was interesting with that they're doing it blindly, which I think
In fact,
is very
our
important.
subjects don't know anything about the experiment being done.
Right.
They don't know anything until we sit them down and we tell them what we need them to do.
Right.
You know, they don't know what technology is being used. They don't know anything.
Yeah, and the great thing about that Krillin, that photography, is that that thing has a sensor that's taking a lot of information from the body, so that thing's taking information and putting it, through the computer and giving that data back to us as well. So that was pretty interesting. And I thought it was really good that when we went out that first time that we added that experiment first before we added that to stuff that I was doing, because that gave us one like path of validation, so that if we have that path, we have two paths of validation, and we have the person. Because I want to be a little bit clear. I've been talking about the science stuff. If you go out and you do stuff and you have an empirical evidence moment, you have something goes off, there's a timing, there's a thing happens, it doesn't mean that's not real or really happening, or that didn't happen. What it really means is that something happened, but we just don't have a way to grasp that moment and use it later, right? So everybody that's out doing stuff and doing work, all that empirical evidence that they're feeling is all building for them to figure something out. So I think that's all of the work that's been done is great. And I'd like to see more of us get together, and talk about this stuff. Because if I could figure out what other people had felt that we haven't yet, then that helps me figure out more stuff, how to find more things.
Right. So.
All right, George.
Still you can, unless okay. I don't know what else you had there. Also, a very special.
I got a bunch of stuff. So
we both do. Okay. Ross, Allison, and Chad Goodwin from ParaSense, the Naked Experiment, award-winning, by the way, too. Go ahead, sir.
I was going to say, one of the things that we've learned since Chad has come into the field, and I have to say, be very grateful for somebody like Chad to be willing to put himself out there, because that's the biggest thing, is a lot of these people in his field aren't willing to take that step, and a lot of it is just getting them into the environment that we're investigating, so that they can witness what we witness. That's usually all it just takes. And to have somebody like him to do that is, a big plus for our field. But I was going to say too, just by having Chad in the field and him adding some of the technology that he's brought to the table, we've learned that a lot of the equipment that most ghost hunters are dependent on is not sensitive enough for what we're picking up, and not even quick enough to pick up some of this stuff.
Right.
So right there, we're failing in the paranormal field, because we're not getting the correct data that we need.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, what we were grabbing was in the 100 to 150 millisecond range before I started really tuning up the sensors for this next one. Right. And I don't think that was fine enough resolution, because you can see when we do those animations, they look jerky, but that's showing in the timestamps where that was as close to real time as we can. So you can see there's a whole bunch of data there we're not even getting. It's that fast, whatever's going on.
Yeah. And Ross is not giving Chad justice when he says he put it out there. He really put it out there. Now, for both of you, as an investigator and as a scientist, this to me seems like the original. This is kind of like in the Conjuring sense, and then all of a sudden there were all these sequels. That here's step one. Does it happen? It does. You've got scientific proof that it does. Now, the following steps would be the typical of how, when, and why. And that's one of the things we've talked about with these residual spirits is wouldn't that be the first area for us to target from a scientific standpoint? Because maybe if we can predict the conditions, we can predict the next event. So are you guys thinking about that down the road? Not necessarily as sequels to this film, but maybe just in the aspect of the paranormal field.
Oh yeah, and that's one of the things that me and Chad have constantly talked about is we don't have. I'd hate to say proof that ghosts exist. We have something that we can validate that something happens when people said that they've been touched. We have enough data to say that there was something there. We're not trying to say yes, there's ghosts, because we need more data. We need to collect more data to validate a lot of this stuff. And as Chad will say, it's data, data, data. And so for us, what we love about this project is as we start to publish all of our findings, the audience gets to watch these new discoveries. They get to watch the science grow. Because as we talked about, it is all trial and error. We learn what works and what doesn't work, and we continue on with that. So it is an amazing project to be a part of. A part of what could be, history making. But we also want to be very clear that, we don't know exactly what it is we're experiencing yet. We don't have all the answers. We're just scratching the surface, and we're inviting you along to join us on these discoveries.
Yeah, and that's the thing. How many scientific discoveries have come from someone dropping an anvil on their foot?
Mm-hmm.
So the trial and error part of it is just, how we learn this. So, I mean, I believe you guys are just scratching the surface myself. I do.
Yeah.
Does that leave you, Chad, in the lab, so to speak, starting to say, okay, these things worked. Now I wonder if we can start getting this added to it, again, compounding, but now you're compounding science instead of paranormal evidence. Is that where your mind is going at this point?
Yeah, in the first round of the stuff that we did, we based it on some of the sensors that Ross was already using, and now seeing that some of those sensors worked, I'm starting to use more high-end sensors that can look between the spaces. So I'm starting to get to things where, when possible, I can sense what's going on in walls, or outside that room, and then we can start to try to look around and see what's happening there. So I'm really trying to stretch out, and I have a bunch of other imaging types of ideas that I want to do. So yeah, I'm definitely trying to compound more and more, because if something's happening in the air and I can't see it, but we have evidence that something's happening, the next steps start to come into how do we now sample the air, or how do we look at the air, or what can we do to figure out composition of matter in the air. I mean, that's really the next step, right?
Yeah.
One of the biggest discoveries with all of this is we are the first to track phenomena. We actually showed something coming into the room, attacking a subject, and then leaving. That's amazing right there.
Right. Yeah. On a, as we clip right there of it. Let me ask you this, not to get too far up over our skis already, but is there any thought, or is it possible on a molecular level to do this with inanimate objects?
Yeah, like I said, some of these other types of things that I want to work toward using would look at objects, around objects, because that's another thing Ross has brought up, is sometimes objects have these things around them happening. And if we can find an object that emits some kind of phenomena that we can pick up, that would get us one step closer. So some of those imaging things I would like to do, and some of the work I would like to do, would definitely just be monitoring objects that have phenomena as well.
Yeah, I mean, because we hear about object manipulation, and Ross, yeah, you're a veteran investigator. That's a common thing. Something moved, something aported, something manifested. So I'm just wondering, maybe you're not prepared yet, but down the road, if maybe in the back of your mind you're going,
Well, one of the things that I really try to stay focused with this research is we really have to have a better understanding of at least one phenomena. And as me and Chad have been focused on touch, granted other things happen while we do these experiments, but if we can have a better idea of how touch happens and we focus our attention on just that one data point, that becomes our root.
Yeah.
And then we can actually spread out and have a better understanding of other types of paranormal phenomena. But if we can at least stay focused on just one and have an idea how that happens, this could open up so many other doors for various different types of paranormal phenomena. That's the biggest problem we have in the paranormal field is everybody's just all over the place. No one's focused on just one phenomena. They're everywhere, and we just sorry.
Well, I wanted to ask Chad from a science perspective to hypothesize the scratches on the back of your neck. It may not be malevolent intent. Is it possible that that contact, because, and you've gauged the speed, would be something similar to shock, like a lightning shock or something of that sense, that rather than looking at it as an ominous attack, that it's something more scientific behind it?
I've been thinking about that. That's a really good one. So one of the things I think about there is if energy can't be destroyed or created, then the energy is already in the space around us. And so then it comes to try to figure out, is there something that's manifesting in that moment that does it? Is there an energy of any kind, right, that's manifesting in that moment? Or, it's one of the things Lloyd Auerbach might say is it us projecting it to ourselves somehow? Mm-hmm. And so when he told me that, I was like, oh, man, now you just blew my mind a little bit. But, I think that's going to be really, if we could figure out what that is, and I have a few, like I said, a few things that I want to try to figure that out. If we can figure out what that is, no matter what that is, if we could just glimpse whatever that is that happens, oh, man, that would be, that would be the thing. And that's the main thing I want to work toward is how do we get a glimpse of what, even if we can't fully see it, we can't see a ghost, what's happening? How do we see it?
Yeah, I don't subscribe to what Lloyd said, though, because we've had too many incidences of people who were employed at a location or resided at a location that had nothing to do with the paranormal, and these events were happening. So I don't think it's a psychosomatic scenario. I really think it's the environment around them.
Well, I have to say that's one of the things that we've actually been able to prove is the fact that, if you are going to be, targeting yourself, that would show energy leaving yourself and then coming back to make the attack, right?
There you go. Yeah.
With our research, we have actually shown with the tracking system,
yes,
something came from nowhere, hit the subject, and then left.
Right.
So right there, that proves that it's not, us projecting it on ourselves.
Yeah, but there's somebody that might want to go ahead and disagree with you on that.
Somebody might want to come and argue with George on that.
That's Lloyd.
Hey, Chad. Hi, Ross.
Hey.
Parapsychologist extraordinaire and the man who makes my brain hurt every time he comes on, Lloyd Auerbach. How are you,
That's my
sir?
job.
I was just saying how you blow my mind with that one comment.
Thank you for joining us. And
yeah, I can come pop in. I thought I'd pop in just for a few minutes. I've got something else.
Sure.
Awesome.
Sure. Your name was just invoked, Lloyd, and here you are. You appear before us.
I knew that.
That's psychic energy.
You knew that. We were actually talking about what were we? We were talking about projection.
Yeah. I was just mentioning, Lloyd, that when we were starting to collect the data, one of the things that I'm looking around me is that environment. Did it manifest in the environment, and how would we know that? Versus I had mentioned, like you had mentioned me, which kind of took me back, was could we actually be doing these things to ourselves to some degree, and how do we juggle that?
Yeah.
Right.
And I told them you didn't have any idea what you were talking about, Lloyd.
Guess not. So I guess I'll see you guys later. Yeah, I mean, this is the problem. There's a problem we've got in parapsychology in general, is that when people get physical effects, who's doing them? It's always who's doing them. We kind of have an idea how to track it down in a typical poltergeist case because there's no indication of any spirits or anything else that's there. But when it comes to things like EVPs or even being touched yourself or feeling like that, a visual that's actually happening. It's not an optical thing. It's not an auditory thing. So we perceive stuff, and then how much of that is possibly us doing, reacting to what we perceive, like somebody intending to do something to us, and we react to that. That's still kind of it's an interaction for sure. And the environmental stuff is really important because we typically don't see environmental changes when people are doing things themselves.
Right. And here's something else I wanted to go while we're on that. Did you guys draw any correlations or have, an idea of how the physical environment affects people physiologically? For example, I had read somewhere, and I want to attribute this to the right person, but I'm drawing a blank, and I don't know, Lloyd, it could have been you, it could have been Richard Wiseman, but somebody had written saying that a dramatic temperature difference between a floor and a ceiling in the room can give someone the sensation that they're being touched. So again, when you're looking at things like temperature, things like that, how they affect us physiologically. Another thing that we've done experiments on is barometric pressure, which there's no empirical evidence. It's just we need more data, as you say, that it may signal something unusual is about to happen.
Well, let's flip it around. I mean, the question here is the environment reacting to something psychic paranormal, or are we reacting to some natural changes in the environment? We always have to look at the natural changes in the environment, and we do react to stuff like that. It's just that when you've got sensors running for quite some time, and the only times there's any fluctuations in the environment is when somebody's having an experience, you can connect that change directly to the experience and then look to see what could be causing that in the environment.
And that was one of the things I picked up from Lloyd too, is he had some sensors on him for looking at the resistance, stress, and stuff like that. And he mentioned right away, we need to start working on getting data from people and the environment, both. So if someone does get touched, we can see what their body was doing with that environment.
Right.
And I think that's, one of the great things about the Spectre system that we had put together is, we're recording all that information, temperature, everything. And so that we can validate, what is happening to the environment. Also, as Chad had said, having a baseline is very important as well. So you can have a better understanding of the environment itself.
Yeah, that's really important, because things happen in the environment that when nobody's around that have nothing to do with anything paranormal or psychic or anything. So you have to be aware of those things too.
Right.
As far as what you experienced viewing these experiments that these gentlemen are now partaking on, what was your impressions of what has transpired so far, and where should they go next?
Well, the one thing that I'd say here is to try doing those same experiments in places that don't have necessarily a history.
Awesome.
But we have people who have homes or other residences or other places that are not known to be haunted in the paranormal world, so to speak. They keep coming to our attention, though. And it'd be nice to be able to try some of these experiments in some of those places as well. The one thing that you'd have to be careful of course, is that if it's at a restaurant, you can't really be naked necessarily, except maybe like in the basement of that pizza place that we went to.
Yeah.
Do the naked experiment. The health department might have something to say about that. But at the same time, if you're trying to track environmental changes and people's experiences without necessarily noting what it looks like when their skin is touched, they can be clothed. So you can still do kind of midway experiments to try to get those patterns of, I feel something, here's what's going on in the environment. I think that if you're looking to see what's going on, that's where the experiments had to go in that direction.
Yeah, because that led me to a question I was going to ask in a little bit. What about doing this in non-volatile locations? because you're obviously going to places that have a history to them. So if it was in a more mundane or benign environment, because those kind of reports, and maybe it would actually be somewhat easier to do when people can do that in the comfort and privacy of their own homes, or that kind of thing. So that's another maybe level to go to.
Well,
Well,
it also.
one
I was going to say it also be interesting. Sorry, Russ.
That's all right. I was going to say one of the things that we can't forget though is we have tons and tons of ideas for experiments, but the biggest challenge that we have in the paranormal field is we've learned it's all about being at the right place at the right time.
Sure.
Right.
So it's a lot more research that you got to do, more time to try and collect the data that we need to try and validate these experiences.
Well, the thing is that there's a couple things here. First of all, there are ways to at least hopefully know somebody's around, and that's if we're talking about either haunting imprints or spirit type stuff, and that's working with practitioners. Good ones, some of the more qualified folks that some of us have worked with over the years. Because then at least that you have another point of, okay, there's somebody here, without telling the person that there's somebody here, the subject, they start feeling something. It connects to the psychic or medium, it connects to the environment. All of those things kind of really add more data points for it and support for each other. The other is, I think you should try it away from darkness. There's no real reason to not do it during the day if that's when the activity seems to be really happening.
But is in the sense they're catering to a programmed audience already. It's the way it should be set up because that's what they expect.
There is an expectation, and the problem is in the dark. There's a greater expectation for somebody to react to something, but not for the environment to react to something. This is the key. Is that if they're in the dark, psychologically, yes, they may react, and they may actually manifest something on their skin, but then there are no changes in the environment. You kind of point it back to the person, not to something external.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah.
Lloyd Auerbach, you're a cornerstone in this field, and I can't thank you enough for jumping on with us. Love to have you stay if you got a bit more time.
We can't thank him enough for being a part of the project too.
Yeah, taking him out and having him see what we do made me feel a lot better when Ross said, "Hey, we're going to go see Lloyd," and then we could have him actually watch us and make sure that he agreed with the method that we were using. Because having peers, that's the other thing with science, is peer review, right? So we're doing a bunch of stuff, and to have Lloyd come out with us, if he would have said, "Hey, this is totally wrong," I would have to rethink about everything that I'm doing, right? So it was good to have
the best.
Yeah.
He's the best.
You're very important for us. Thank you.
Yeah.
So now you can go back to grading your papers.
Thank you. I just finished my taxes. I do have to grade. I have a great stack of stuff I got to finish up for the classes. My students already on my.
You are a man of total adventure. I appreciate that.
All right.
Thank you so much.
All
have
right.
a good night.
Lloyd, thank you, sir. We'll have you on
We love
soon.
you, Lloyd.
Okay. Thanks.
All right. Bye-bye.
Well, there you go. Merry Christmas, guys.
Talk about true validation. That's really fantastic. But on the same token of what they're talking about here, or what Lloyd was saying, were things that were going through my head as I'm watching the investigation. And yes, when you're filming, you have to have a bit of that suspense novelty to it, because that's what people who are enthusiasts of the paranormal and involved in the paranormal are somewhat anticipating. We're going to do a live investigation in a couple of weeks here on the show, and we'll be using all types of night vision, everything, but there'll be some lit areas. Do you kind of plan, in a sense, Ross, Chad, either one, that as these experiments continue to move forward, that type of filming isn't really necessary during the trial stage? Perhaps when you've gotten to a level on the next level that you want to certainly film it for an audience, you still have to bring in that dramatic flair. Would you think?
Well, for me, I've always felt whatever is happening in the environment and you're documenting it correctly, you always want to return to the environment when the activity seems to be more active. If it's with lights on, hey, then we'll do it with lights on. I do have to say, though, to add to that, that was one of our biggest fears when putting this documentary together. Is yes, we're trying to bring science into it, and we're trying to let the audience know that science can be engaging and educational, but you also wonder if the audience is too far gone because they're so used to watching, I hate to say it, crappy shows that, focus on the scare factor for the audience.
Right.
And yes, startling things did happen, and we were able to prove it, during our, filming. But yeah, I'm all for doing experiments with lights on if that's when it seems to be more active.
Yeah.
When as I run my own organization, a Ghost, we learned that you never want to change the environment. If things are happening in the environment under certain conditions, you need to do the investigation under those conditions.
Absolutely. I'm going to play devil's advocate here for a second, though, because at one point during this, you do the Gansfield experiment. And the reason you're doing that is sensory deprivation.
Right.
So, I mean, you can speak to this. I don't know how we've always heard if you take away one sense, it heightens other senses.
Right.
Okay. I mean, I guess, but I'm going to be a little bit of a nerd here and say, can't you reconcile doing it in the dark with the same reason you do the Gansfield experiment? Because you are taking away one sense, our ability to see the visible light spectrum, and you're enhancing other senses. So I understand what you're saying. You want to do it under all different conditions. Hell, do it on a stormy day, on a hot day, a cold day, with men and women, and you want to do it under all circumstances. But I would say doing it in the dark in this case, and I don't know if this was intentional, but what you do with the Ganfield experiment in terms of sensory deprivation, that's the first thing I thought. I probably should have asked this when Lloyd was here, but to me, that's variation of a theme. It's the same. You're in the same ballpark.
Right.
So just to kind of play devil's advocate on that, it's like, what was the big deal about doing it in the dark?
I have. Well, I'll let Chad talk on this one because he likes to talk about this as well.
Well, one of the things I think about it is, if you take someone's sensory of sight away during the day, and you don't know what's in the space, you could fool yourself into feeling a little more safe. I think some of the stuff that's done in the dark, well, it could go either way. But I think one of the things that makes it what really important is the spaces that we were in those moments. Granted, things were happening during the day. When we were filming, another one of the camera guys got scratched when we went down into the whole area. Mm-hmm. There was a scratch on his neck, and that happened in the middle of the day. And so I think that the big reason for the dark for us in this one, in these haunted spaces, was more that it puts your body in a fight or flight immediately. You're in the dark and you're in the space, but you can hardly see in front of you. You can see on the lux, we're bouncing around 1 to maybe 5 on that. So it's hard to see. You can see maybe an exit sign in the distance. Mm-hmm. But more of it was about putting people in that fight or flight scenario so that they would become more sensitive. Doing it during the daytime, I think, is very interesting because I think during the day you may have different environmental factors that you can find rhythmically, possibly, when everybody's moving around and there's all this different electromagnetic interference of people moving around.
Sure. And that's the big thing too, is when you're doing these experiments, you need to have a controlled environment. And it's harder to do experiments when the places are still very active with the living, doing their day-to-day things. So that's why most ghost hunting tends to happen at night, is because now you have access to this place, you have more control over the environment. Sure. And that's usually when people report activities, because now you're in relaxed mode and you're more aware of what's going on around you, rather than dealing with the hustle bustle of the day-to-day activities.
Sure. There's a practical sense to it too. I tell people, do we need it to be dark? Absolutely not.
No.
It can be a TV trope. However, we operate at night because people have jobs. People are home. There's less foot traffic. Right. So, there's a practical reason for it beyond just trying to give everybody the heebie-jeebies.
Yeah, less contamination, be sure. Only a few minutes before we go to break here, guys. But now I'm going to throw something at you, and Chad kind of piqued my interest as far as the possibilities of this. Being in that environment, nighttime, you're in a prison, you're naked, you're vulnerable, and so you are emitting, I guess, in a sense, a certain type of energy. Is that something that somehow down the road can be measured, or now can be measured? A person who's just in a very calm state, middle of the day, and you have those measurements, and now seeing whether or not, because the one theory in the paranormal, and just the theory in the paranormal, is the energy is absorbed by the spirit. So if you're that much more heightened, that vibration is higher, are you basically drawing them in at that point in time? Is that something that is potentially researched and can be data-based for us?
That's one of the things that Lloyd, and he brought up what we should be looking at for people. I think that it's going to be looking at O2, it's going to be looking at heart rate, it's going to be looking at stress, skin, how much sweat that's your stress level, and trying to figure out how to correlate those into something with something, and then figuring out then again how to go back and pick up just the pieces of data that you need. See, that's the whole thing. Yes, that would be awesome, but until we have enough other points to correlate what to look for, I think we're years away from figuring this out.
That was going to be one of my questions physiologically. EKG, EEG, these are not cheap things. Yeah. Measuring things like galvanic skin response, heartbeat, blood pressure. Here's the challenge for that. I guess you'd have to get a baseline, because if somebody is already in a heightened state of anxiety in a dark cell someplace, the chance of false positives would probably be a challenge for you, because it's another thing to say, hey, calm down. What's the worst that could happen? You know what I mean? It's going to be hard to get somebody's respiration down.
Now, we got to go to break real quick, guys. If you want to respond to that on the other side, we'd love for you to do that. Stay with us, guys. You're watching Dead or Live on the Dead or Full Spectrum channel. We'll be back right after this break.
Hey members, the new KGRA DB app is now available on iOS and Android devices. Gain on-demand access to any KGRA DB programming. Download any show directly to your mobile device to listen or watch on the go. Go to the App Store and search KGRA DB.
As UFO reports come in from around the world, the Mutual UFO Network, MUFON, is there. We continue to explore new cases and build our massive database. We share our information with the world in a number of ways. If you would like to be part of our investigative team, you are always welcome. What could be more exciting than exploring the UFO question firsthand? Join MUFON, find your friends.
Did you know 75% of Americans are chronically dehydrated? If you struggle with focus, run low on energy, or when it's time to finally sleep, you simply can't, this can all be linked to dehydration, and Fuel Up has the answer. Our proprietary formula contains the finest cellular hydration with the strongest immune-enhancing natural ingredients. The Fuel Up system is made up of 3 different incredibly tasting varieties. Wake kickstarts your day with a jolt of caffeine. Play boosts focus while hydrating your cells. Rest not only helps you relax, but also rejuvenates your cells while you sleep. Here's what our clients have to say.
I really don't miss my coffee, and you can tell the difference.
So I'm going to take it for the energy. I'm going to take it for the play. I'm going to take it, all day.
And it works. That's the thing. It works. We love it.
Take the Fuel Up Challenge now, where we offer a Feel the Difference money-back guarantee. Fuel Up for life.
You're listening to the KGRA Digital Broadcasting Network. We provide unparalleled coverage of trending news in the world of ufology, cryptozoology, and paranormal phenomenon. Whether you're watching our video live stream or listening to one of our audio programs, you are getting the best from world-renowned researchers and hosts, guiding you through topics the mainstream won't touch. Miss one of your favorite programs? No problem. Head over to the members area at kgradb.com for access to our massive library of award-winning content. Make contact, stay connected, only at kgradb.com.
Are witches real? Could you live next door to one? Do they have supernatural powers? Can anyone be a witch? My name is Melissa St. Hilaire, and I'm a professional witch. Join me as I introduce you to my fellow practitioners when we ask them to reveal their secrets of the craft.
Mr. DaCosta, I know you want to talk about that debuting and a couple other announcements upcoming, correct?
Yeah, real quick. Let's do some housework here. Secrets of the Craft will be debuting, we believe, middle of this month, featuring our friend Melissa St. Hilaire, who is going to take you around the city of Los Angeles and different surrounding towns to introduce you, as she mentioned in the promo, to some of her friends, different emporiums, and it'll be insightful and I think humorous and
scary. It'll be scary.
All those. Oh, it'll be scary. Oh, you have to watch because it's scary. No, but middle of the month that'll happen. The next thing I want to talk about real quick, something near and dear to me, is this year's Ocean State Paracon. My group, my merry band, Rise Up Paranormal, and The Conjuring House are both presenting this year, and this is our esteemed lineup. You'll probably notice some very familiar faces there, some dead air celebrities, Andrea Perrin, Canning Corey Heinzen, and Jacqueline Nunez, all present and former owners of The Conjuring House. Cody and Satori will be there, Carlin Keith Johnson, Christopher Rondina, Ron Murphy, Amanda Millette, and Tim Weisberg. And that's September 9th and 10th, 2023, the Assembly Theater in Harrisville. We have already arranged for some tours of The Conjuring House as well as a Sunday night investigation. So tell your friends, wake the kids.
Going back to The Conjuring House again, are we?
We are going back to The Conjuring House. Yes, we are. If you don't have friends, make some.
Isn't that nice?
Yeah. You've not been yet. I know.
No. Let's bring our. You have one more banner, right?
We should also tell these folks what's going on next week. Nothing.
That's right.
We are taking Easter off, but
vacation.
We will be back on April 16th with another live investigation right here on KGRA. And
we're going to do it naked. We're all going to be naked for this one.
Somebody's going to be naked. I guarantee you that. We are going to be coming to you from the Oliver House in Middleborough, Massachusetts.
I know that one.
You've probably seen it on shows like Kindred Spirits. And, where'd you go, George? There you go. Kindred Spirits. And, a couple of others. I'm not sure. Nick Roth had been there. So it's been a heavily investigated house. We were the first to do it years ago when they first opened. So we haven't been back there since. So we're going to bring you that live investigation on April 16th from 8 to 10 right here live on KGRA and Dead Air.
Yeah, make sure you guys hit the reminder bell once again for the upcoming content. Time to get back to tonight's content and our very special guest. We are talking ParaSense, The Naked Experiments with Ross Allison and Chad Goodwin. And guys, thank you so much for being with us tonight again. We really appreciate it.
You bet.
Great.
Now, Ken, you brought something up just prior to the break. I don't know if you want to reiterate so that these gentlemen can respond.
Yeah, we were talking a little bit about physiological changes in us and measuring those as well as the environment around people. We talked about, Chad brought up, measuring heart rate, blood pressure, EKG, EEG, galvanic skin response. And as we kind of left this hanging, the potential challenges for that type of thing to get people in a calm state so you get your baseline.
Right.
There we go.
Whatever that's going to be. So anyway, guys, take it away.
So I think in that instance, what we'd look to do is similar to what we did, in the beginning at Northport, where we did baselines of people in a space where everybody felt comfortable. In the instance of having data collection of the body, we're looking to design a wearable essentially that does all that, so that we can put these units on people in their daily life of what we're doing or leading up to doing experiments and see what they're doing. Because again, the baseline, like you're mentioning, the baseline is the most important part of trying to figure out what's going on. Because if somebody has rhythmic heartbeat issues, we have to know that. If someone has high anxiety in their life, we need to know what the baseline of their anxiety is before we put them into another space. So yeah, I mean, that's how I would approach that.
All right.
Yeah, to understand the paranormal and what we're looking for, we have to look down all the avenues. We have to understand what it is that's happening to the physical body when people claim to have paranormal encounters. We have to understand the environment itself. That's going to give us a better idea of what we call paranormal.
Right.
I think it'd be interesting too to do long-term baselines in places, because our equipment will run for a few days on its batteries. If we could do that, figure out specific times when we see rhythmic things, if they're there, and then put people in the space in those rhythmic moments and see if they experience anything. Right. So once we start collecting data, there's a bunch of stuff we can do to try to validate that. We just need more.
I'd like to go down this road only because I know it aggravates Ken, because I won't let this go. I am like a pit bull with regards to the miracle that we are experiencing right now. I'm going to pull this banner back up again so you guys can see the two. But if you see the top row on the right-hand side, you see Cody Desbians and Satori Hawes. I don't think I need to let you guys know who they are, but, they're part of the Ghost Hunters. I think they start their season this week, Ken. Is that right?
6th or the 5th. Yeah.
5th or 6th, right. So I'll give you the Reader's Digest version of what they're doing. They're doing the knocking technique as they hold hands. Now it's getting to the point in time they just have to touch arms, and they're getting these knocking communications that are mind-blowing now. Ken told me about this probably about 6 months ago. He was blown away. He knew about it, but when they started doing investigations, the things that were happening were nothing short of awe-inspiring. This is what we needed for the field for the longest time. And I've always said what's going to move this forward is going to be a technique or tech, such as what you guys are using, a location, or an individual who may be a conduit. They kind of fit into the conduit and the technique level. Now, when they have done this in front of Ken, and Ken's told me about it, I kind of stood back and was, ridiculing it. And I don't buy it. I've even seen it. They've done it on our show. And I'm like, this is just amazing. But, I want to dig my teeth into it like any of us would do as investigators. Then they came to visit down here in Florida. And I'm right there with them. And they're standing on concrete on the bottom floor of the St. Augustine Old Jail. And this tapping is happening. Then they go up onto the second floor where the hardwood is, and a different volume and a different impact on the wood. The tapping is going on. This is legitimately happening. This is middle of the day. What I'm tending to go with along the lines of spirit activity is that it's all around us. It's everywhere. We are, not really as aware of it during the day. I'm sure, again, with as Ken said, all the distractions that are happening around us during the day, a lot of contamination. This cuts right through it. And I've nagged Ken. This is the only way I could put it about getting science involved. What it is that they're doing right now and validating it, controlled environment type of validating it. And I understand Ken, as you know, Cody was with Rise of Paranormal for many, many years. He's very protective of both of these kids, and I respect and understand that. But I hold no responsibility as he does with regards to it. And I'm just like, we got to get this moving forward. Um, I wonder whether or not, again, as you're hearing me describe this, and if at some time one or both of you go back and look at some of the times they've been on the show and what they've been able to create, if it will give you that incentive to say, as Lloyd was saying, we can do this anywhere. So long as we set it up in a certain way, we can do this at any time, at any place, because it seems that no matter what, these spirits show up when these kids are doing this. And it could be, again, the beam that they emulate. But
We've heard knocking and stuff in environments too. We had a weird thing where in Northport, there people wouldn't come upstairs because they just didn't want to come upstairs. But one lady said, "Hi, Claire," who's what they named that person in that space, and there was and the weird thing about the knock that we heard was it wasn't consistent with any other object that was in the space. So we're walking around and like trying to figure out what it was, or if somebody could have done it, or anything, and there was no way to understand what that was. And that's where I think, having more microphones in space and trying to understand, because here's one of the things I've kind of been tweaked out on: EVPs, right? So Ross,
some of those EVPs you guys caught were amazing, by the way.
One of the things that really amazed me is in my past life, I worked in radio, right? And I was an audio engineer. Mm-hmm. And if you have the interference of certain things like cell phones in your pocket, you can get a tick, 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 tick that comes across the audio, right? And it's not interacting with your ears, it's interacting with the machine directly. And then after a long period of time, and there's an EVP that comes in and you hear a voice say something. And what got me on that was it was the same tone notched as that tick, tick, tick. And it sounded like it was in a distance, right? So it sounded like it wasn't actually there. It was somewhere else and it was coming into it. Mm-hmm. So when I hear those kind of things and I think about EVPs, I start thinking about things like EMI versus EMF and the interference patterns of electronics on other electronics, or if that energy is interacting directly with the electronics because we can't hear it. How do we figure out how to just listen to those interference bands, or how do we figure out how to amplify that area with something so that, we might be able to hear more?
I would say corroborating equipment, one of the best things that we have called a tri-field natural meter. I'm preaching to the choir with Ross. If it's set to microwave, if there's any kind of interference that's coming, that needle is going to bounce at the same time, because now you're getting cell phone, two-way radio communications, police car goes by. So we use that in corroboration. And the other thing we like to do is triangulate recorders. We'll put them in four corners of the room and one in the middle, set to the same volume. Maybe they're different type of recorders. And depending what we get, if it's just recorded on one, then it's area specific. So, I mean, listen, nothing is infallible that we've ever done, but we do as much as we possibly can to ask ourselves the same questions we know we're going to get externally. So it's trial and error. You learn from these things. There are how many EVPs, Ross, have said get out, and then you find out somebody kicked the chair in the other room,
right?
Because you're using MP3 format, which is a lossy format.
Yeah,
which compresses the sound so much that everything sounds like it's telling you to get out.
Right.
Yeah, the sheer amount of artifacts.
Right. So, and you use digital, you use external microphones if you're using analog and things like that. It's not infallible, Chad, but I mean,
Well, the biggest problem we have in the paranormal field is we don't have a standard. Everybody,
no.
every group does ghost hunting in their own way.
right.
And so when we submit our possible evidence to the public, we have to face the fact that a lot of us are just going to question it because we don't know how they captured that phenomena. If we want to get further in this field, we have to have a standard. We have to be able to trust each other on how we collect evidence. And that's one of the things that me and Chad are, trying to do. We're being as transparent as possible, so you guys can see how it should be done,
Right.
and why it is so important. And to know that this is not the magic of editing. This is not just to get subscribers to our channel. This is, we're trying to do it right. We're trying to show the audience that there is something out there. You don't have to be manipulated as an audience member to believe us. This is all out there for you guys. We want to put all of our experiments out there, from the full experiment. Yeah, it might be as boring as watching paint dry, but you can at least watch it to see that this is not, again, the magic of editing. This is not an actor paid to, to scream and run out of the room. This is somebody really sitting there naked, and we're hoping to collect something.
Yeah, we don't have that big a budget to hire people to.
No.
Yeah, that's true.
Which is why, Chad, why I hate Ross so much, because he has a scientist.
Hey, I'd be happy to come visit you guys and go hunting.
You don't grow.
I rent him by the hour, just so you know.
It's I mean, just talking about the knocking thing. I mean, we have had numerous debates, exhaustive debates, about what is that knocking sound. Is it, a physical knock that they're doing? They're exerting energy in doing it. Is it a piercing through the veil? Is it a cross-dimensional sound that happens? Is it talking, but that's how it's coming across as they're talking? We're still trying to figure all this out. And here Ross has Chad to just, okay, let me just go ahead and go in my lab and I'll come up with something. I hate you.
Where'd you go, George? You dropped again.
Did I do that? I keep when I pound down, that happens. Okay.
Yeah, what we've done with these kids, and they figured it out. It found them. They didn't find it. They did it actually. I'm not sure if they did it on the show behind the scenes filming, but they found out when they rubbed shoulders. So it started tapping. So they figured out a way to go through the alphabet. When we get to that letter, knock on it, spell out the words and the amount of words you want to say. And it's even gotten to the point, and this is the bigger point on that. On at least 4 occasions, and so far, I'm the only one that it's happened to, where what I'm thinking gets spelled out. Like, I'm thinking about this 19-year-old girl who died in 1850, whatever. And I said, oh, when we come back, I want to ask about, and then they spell out Ken thinking about me. And I'm like, are you serious? And okay, who is it? And she spelled out Louise, which was the girl's first name. And George had made the point that these happen at the speed of a thought. This communication can happen. So this is why it's is it presentation and perception? Are there two things that work? They are presenting and we are perceiving. They're the quarterback, we're the receiver. I mean, I don't expect us to answer this here tonight, but, it's the questions, which is why I admire and support what you guys are doing, because you're just asking a question. At the end of this, and those of you out there, when you record it, it's not evidence, it's data. It only becomes evidence after review. We got some great evidence last night. Okay, fine. But, I'm aware of a ghost, which is Advanced Ghost Hunters of Seattle, Tacoma.
Yep.
Seen you on television, seen what you do, thinking outside the box, Russ. And this is why it's nice to talk to you, because I've been aware of your group for a long time. And I said, I like the way that guy goes about his things. At the end of the day, you might say, well, that failed miserably. And then the next day, you're right back on the bicycle.
Right.
So leads me to another question now, summing this whole thing up and this first run at these type of things. You do kind of like a self-review of yourself. In this now, the documentary's out there, you lived it. Would you do anything different? Second part of that question, we covered some of it, but what would you add to it? What did you kind of wish that you would have after you kind of looked at it from 10,000 feet?
Well, what would I have done different? I would have seeked out Chad a lot sooner.
Okay.
You could have gotten a lot more information, gotten a little further ahead if I had taken that step. But otherwise, I think for me, going back and watching it, there was a lot that we had to cut out. A lot. Like I said, 6 years, hundreds of experiments and research done, and it's hard to put it all into just 90 minutes. So for me, I think one of the things that we have developed as we put this together is we want to be able to share the past with the audience, showing a little bit of those 6 years, taking a piece of what I did 6 years ago and applying it to now. And the nice thing about now having Chad on board is he can take that experiment that I did in the past and say, okay, this is great. Now let's see how can we collect data from this. One of the prime examples that we're doing for the next one is the puppet. We introduced the experiment, the puppet, where I came up with this idea of taking elastic string and attaching it to the more sensitive parts of the body and stretching it out into the room. And so if anything should move around the room, I was curious, does it affect the string? Will they feel a vibration or a tug? And that was happening. Subjects were feeling it. Chad's tried it himself and can validate that. And so there's something happening, but again, it's their personal experience. I cannot prove that they felt a vibration or a tugging on the string. But now with Chad, his challenge is to collect that data. How can you read the tension of the string to prove that something did manipulate the string while the subject was sitting there? That's how we want to take this.
Right.
You want to be able to take a basic experiment and advance it for the audience so they can, as I said, watch the science grow. See how me and Chad work great as a team. I come with the basics, he advance it.
Yeah, it's excellent. I have to know, when you're going about this, how many people turned you down for this in terms of subjects before you finally came up with like 4 people?
I do have to admit, finding female subjects was the biggest challenge, and which I could understand. It could be intimidating.
Yeah, right, sure. Yeah, you can.
Yeah,
Hollywood director.
In a room with men, I think would be intimidating for that situation. So it was harder to find women, but once they understood that we're really doing this for science, then a few people started to come forward. So that was a big challenge for us. Getting into some places and telling them up front what we were trying to do there was a few challenges ahead there. But once people started to see that we are very serious in our approach of what we're doing here, this is not just a gimmick or, for shits and giggles, to see naked people. We had to validate and prove to people there is something to this.
Yeah,
that was a great thing about having Lloyd there too, was, it was great to have him see the experiments with the people again as a peer review to say, okay, you're not just doing crazy stuff. You're actually trying to do something,
Right. But this is the thing that these people are understanding, that, you're showing your belly. I mean, you're going to be in a very vulnerable position. What is it? And again, we just touched on it before, but what is it about the vulnerability of this that seems to invite these type of things, because strictly on a paranormal sense, you see that children are frightened, the weakest among us, the most vulnerable among us, seem to be afflicted with this type of thing, where those type of claims, those type of reports come in. And here are these people that it's like, yeah, we want you to be that person, you know, um, to put yourself at whatever is there at their mercy, essentially. And then it manifests itself because a couple of people were physically attacked, you included, Chad.
Yeah. Well, the other thing that comes about from all of that too, when that happens, is I didn't get to talk to the other subjects, but that the whole experience of shooting the ParaSense was, we did a lot of hours. We were shooting a lot, but after the fact, I was surprised at how emotionally it impacted me. When you mentioned getting scratched and watching other things going on, and there was a lot of things. There's a big story about some stuff that happened to me in D Block. I was in there by myself, and that's how I started antagonizing, because Ross always told me, he's like, don't antagonize these things, but I decided to, and I had an experience that led to doing what you saw. And it was a lot. Like, it emotionally drained me, and I broke down a little bit when I got home, and everything that moved in my condo, I was trying to sleep, I was like looking around and trying to, so
Yeah.
I think when you put people in those spaces and then you strip off any bit of protection, and then they have experiences, it's not only the experience that matters. It's a lot about what happens to you after the fact.
Yeah, there's a bit of PTSD that's
Yeah.
involved in that. So I gotta ask, Ross, I know this isn't your thing. With a group, you take a more respectful, conciliatory tone. You get more with sugar than you do with barbed wire. And when Chad is sitting there going, "You birds up, shit, freaking shit, freaking," like, were you like over in the corner saying, "Ooh, dude, ooh," or was it just like, just let him go?
I just let him go. But as I even said in the documentary, when I walked up to Chad after that experiment, I said, boy, don't ever let me piss you off.
Right.
My experiment was like 10, 15 minutes. So you only got to capture a little bit of it.
Yeah. So what did you learn from that, Chad?
I learned that if you, in the right spaces with the right conditions, if you push too hard, you can definitely bring a response on.
Right.
And that might not be what you were expecting.
I'm sure it wasn't.
What was the consensus of all of the volunteers involved with this, the ones that were sitting in these chairs, the ones that were isolated, for the sensation? I know that some of them said, the breeze that they would feel. Myself personally, when I have felt a physical contact, most of it has been benign. Again, it's all in the style of how you're investigating as well and how you're communicating, but it felt like cobwebs. It's the best way for me to describe it. And each time I've had that contact, you're nodding your head, Ross, so you either yourself or someone's giving you that same description. Was this a contrast to that, or were there mixtures of that along with the scratches?
It was a mixture of all kinds of different sensations that people were having. From the cold breezes that people would felt, the pressure, as Chad had talked about, a tickling sensation. So there's all kinds of different types of touch when people had these experiences. What's fascinating is when you are able to detect patterns. As we found with the scratches, we had a pattern. Something came in, hit the target, and then left. There's pattern there, and that's so important for science. We also had, the experiences where people kept, saying that they were experiencing the same thing during different experiments. As Chad can validate, so when we were at Northport, everybody, that did the experiments kept saying that they felt something off to, I think, their right, on the right hand side. And that was consistent with the different subjects that did the same experiment. They kept having the same reports of what they were experiencing. So there's a little bit of pattern to that as well.
And those people, the other thing too is we kept the people away from the space in Northport, so nobody, they were all at a house, and we brought them in individually as we needed them. And you also see at the prison, like we're 300 feet downstairs, down and around a corner and in another space, so between these people not knowing really what the other person felt and also being so far away from them, it starts to lend itself a little bit better to the validation that what's happening and people are feeling isn't because they know that that's already in the space. It's because they're experiencing it for the first time as well and having that same experience. Now, that's where the empirical evidence to me starts to become a little more of a scientific, data rhythm, is if you have that many people that don't have any idea what's going on and they all have the same feeling in the same space, that's as close to empirical data with a pattern as you can get, right?
Absolutely. It's almost the same process I know that Ken does with regards to the EVPs they capture, listening and seeing how many people hear the same thing. And if everybody's got a different answer, you just throw it out, But when they come across clearly, there's no question to it. Our very, very special guest tonight joining us again is Ross, Allison, and Chad Goodwin. They are the stars, if you will, of ParaSense, the Naked Experience. Where can people check this out? If they want to go ahead and watch this after our show tonight or tomorrow, where can they find this?
Well, we're on all the major streamings, Amazon. You can also get it on Apple TV, YouTube. It's out there on YouTube as well. It's also on DVD. You can buy it through Walmart or even Amazon as well. You can buy the DVD.
Well,
strongly recommend it to all you people out there. George and I watched it, so strongly recommend you give this a look if you're looking for something a little bit different.
Here's my recommendation. Go watch it on Apple TV, and then this way you can watch Ted Lasso after so that you won't be scared anymore. That's the way you're supposed to work it.
Like that.
Unfortunately,
I have to say, I really appreciate your guys' plug for this because I submitted it to you guys because I figured if anything, I'd get an honest response from you guys. Because again, we want to get it out there. We want people in the field to understand that there's a totally different way that you can be investigating. And we want the feedback. Even if it's negative, we want the feedback. And the one negative response we got was, I didn't get to see people completely naked. They were upset because everybody was blurred. Sorry.
When I said that, I was joking, okay?
Next week.
That boats that question then is what you're looking at when you're looking at the aura and the interaction that's going on, plus the data that's just filling up that screen. Is it the necessity from this point on? I mean, yes, there's a shock value. There's a draw to it, to people being naked during an investigation. But at this point in time, let's say that this science got as popular as a K2, but actually worked. And you had teams out there going, can they still do this? Can you move forward with them wearing simply a leotard or something like that? Or does the nakedness have to be a necessity for this result? Because what I'm seeing on screen has nothing to do with the physical connection, and where the scratches happened were in areas that would have happened anyway had you been wearing clothing. The neck and the arm. So is the naked as essential as the science, is my question.
I would say yes, as we try to answer that simple question, what happens to the physical body when people are touched? You never want to put yourself in a situation where you have a just missed it phenomena because somebody did get scratched down their back and unfortunately they were wearing a shirt. You want to at least have the opportunity to collect as much data as possible. And if you're going to limit yourself because somebody, for modesty reasons, wants to be wearing clothes, unfortunately, you miss out on data that hasn't been collected. Even Lloyd says in the documentary, this is all new data for us. So it's important to collect as much of that data as possible to help advance us to the next step. And once we have a better understanding of what's happening in the physical body itself, then we can advance and say, okay, well, clothes aren't necessarily needed now because we know what happens to the physical body. We have that information now. But for right now, we need that data, that raw data, to help us get to that point.
Okay. I have a much larger point to make about a facet of your experiment before we get out of here tonight. But I got to ask you, how is it so that physical contact can be made? I'm asking you to just, if you want to give best guess, theorize, whatever. I mean, you've got a couple of dimensions here that apparently crisscross, but how is it possible that we can actually physically, or I should say they on the other side can like physically interact with us to the point where they can make contact with us?
Well, I think a couple of different things could be going on there, and I've been thinking about this. If it appears that whatever is happening can interact directly with electronics and not have us understand it, we are essentially electronic, right? We have electrons running around. We have energy running through all of our neurons. We have all of these things going on. So it could be as simple as, once we figure out what the interference is and what is the thing that's interacting that we can capture, and how could that be translated to our bodies, that could be one of the things. Like I said, the scratch, unless something manifests in that space, it could actually interact with our own body and create that situation, right? Because again, if it's an interference, if it's electromagnetic, if it causes any kind of high magnetic situation or something like that, it could interact with our body that way.
Do you think that one of the upgrades, as you guys pursue this more vigorously and from different dimensions, that the aspect of possibly getting scratched, if you're going to a volatile location, to have some sort of a camera, maybe multi-spectrum cameras on the front and the back of the individual, to capture it as it's happening, these scratches? Is that something you gentlemen have talked about?
That's something we do now. Yeah. We have a 360 setup. When we are actually filming the experiments, we're doing top, back, left, right, and front. We're trying to get all angles.
But
wait,
when Chad got scratched, she came up and with a flashlight to take a look at it. One of the members of the team. So I was wondering whether or not there's something that could have that type of intensity to be able to see it as it's forming.
There is some imaging things that Ross wants me to keep under wraps, but there are a few different imaging techniques that we can do that trick essentially the electronics that we're using to record, to allow us to see things that you can't see with your naked eye. That's all I can say about it, because Ross won't let me say anything else. But I'm working on a technique for that. And in fact, what I would really like to do, and I've told Ross this, I don't know if we'll ever figure it out, is I would like to apply that once we've had it out in the field to someone passing away right in front of us, and see if we can detect from that imaging that I want to, develop deeper, to see what happens in the moments around the body when the person actually passes away.
Good luck getting volunteers for that one.
I know, right? But, that's ultimately where I think it may have to go to, is once we have data to understand, is then can we actually sense something with these sensors that we've been able to pick up other things in those actual moments? Or is it something that manifests afterwards, and that spirit or whatever it is comes back or goes to a specific place, or an imprint happens, or right? It's a lot.
Sure. One of the things that we're using on investigations now is 360-degree video technology.
Right.
So we can literally relive an investigation.
Right. I've always hated it on the ghost hunting shows. It's like, did you hear that? Did you see that? And the camera's never aimed right at that spot, We have
this
360
eliminates
technology. Use it. You know?
Yeah, we've even gotten to the point. We have an Oculus that we'll use,
That's awesome.
where it's like 20 seconds before that noise happens, I'm going to turn and look where it came from,
right,
to see what was going on. So, I mean, we didn't invent the technology, but it's like anything else. We're applying it to what we're doing.
Right.
And,
No, it's great.
It's awesome. I had, we got about a little less than 20 minutes. I wanted to get into this real quick. So, apologies in advance. Bear with me. A few years ago, I was watching a show, had nothing to do with the paranormal. It was on celestial bodies. And they were talking about how they can detect planets that are, beyond the capability of our most powerful telescopes. And how they did it is they would focus on a star and put a light meter on it. And every 12 or 24 hours, the light meter would signal it would decrease. And then 12 hours later or 24 hours later, it would decrease. So even though they couldn't see a planet or a moon or whatever, they said, oh, we've discovered a new planet, even though we couldn't see it. So I thought to myself, how about if I bought a lux meter, right? And I put it to measure light. Even if you hook up a beam, if you're trying to, trap a shadow figure, you aim a beam at it, whether it's laser, it could be a flashlight.
Right.
So we bought a program you can put through a laptop that every second takes a reading. Every second takes a reading. And then at some point, all of a sudden, you see a decrease in the lux reading. And when I saw you guys doing this kind of thing where you said that you noticed that light anomalies would happen just before someone experienced something. So again, one of my famous two-part questions. Was this consistent during this experiment? I mean, obviously, because you're mentioning it. And this idea of a light meter, I know you were taking readings because that was in your arsenal.
Right.
So I was fascinated by it. I gave a big woohoo because right away I got it, what you're trying to achieve there. So as a geek, as kind of a nerd, can you guys just talk about that? Because I think that's underdone in this field, visible light, and it said like, oh, I got my recorder and I got this and I got my thing that goes ping and my lights that light up. And I'm just kind of like,
right.
It was that was a pretty cool one when he had that, and that that was part of his original Spectre system, and then we put 4 of those around the subject. One of the things that really fascinated me was when we were at Northport. I think one of the times we were at Northport, we all experienced at once and commented that the space just got really dark. All of a sudden, all of us experienced the space get super dark and closed in, and then it kind of opened back up again. We didn't have our lux out at that moment, but I was like, man, we got to get that. And like I said, we're running 100 milliseconds or less on our lux meter, depending on how we tune it. And I'm really hoping that we catch some of that, what you're saying there, because I think that's an interesting experience.
Right. It's measurable.
It is.
Yeah.
It is.
There aren't a lot of things that are measurable,
And as Chad was talking about the Spectre system that I had put together, it was just one directional. And now, thanks to Chad, we now have a full 360 system. So we can see what's going on around. So like you're saying with, VR, and having the 360 cameras, you're not missing anything anymore. The camera's not pointed in the wrong direction. Right. Now we can, read the whole environment. And that's what I think we're missing in the paranormal field is everybody's so, dependent on their one directional piece of equipment. And most of the time you're pointing in the wrong direction.
Yeah.
So we need to break away from that.
This is why I always tell people, especially, the youngins out there, if you want to learn about cameras, don't go to a paranormal website. Go to Sony. Go to Nikon. Go outside the echo chamber and learn something about the technology that has nothing to do with ghost hunting.
Mm-hmm.
And I think you'll be rewarded.
Well, that's the problem we have in this field. Is it's a prime example of the blind leading the blind. Most of the people get their education from watching the television shows. And they think now, I've seen every episode of Ghost Adventures. I'm now a professional ghost hunter. And there's so much more you're missing out
Or
on.
you're like Chad calling out spirits.
And there's, the biggest thing is, if you've got one bad teacher telling you how to do ghost hunting and everybody follows suit, everybody's doing it wrong. So, we need stronger subjects out there in the forefront to teach us, to guide us in the right direction. And unfortunately, there's just far too many of the wrong people doing it.
Yeah, I'd love to see the photography / videography levels improve. Case in point, the 20-year-old with the lipstick in the prison, seeing this black mass. I've experienced that myself.
All right.
I would have loved that there was a way that the cameras could be angled the right way and or capture it, because we've all experienced that too, where somebody's seeing something and on all the other cameras or security cameras, nothing is there.
Right.
But they're seeing it with their own eyes. So, there's a lot of spectrums that we're still missing here that the cameras are not picking up. It's incredible.
Well, it's just like the photographs that I'm sure, Ross, you get them. Somebody sends you a picture of an orb or somebody. What do you think? Or it's pareidolia, it's matrixing and stuff. And you try to be as gracious as possible. You don't want to insult anybody, but, they don't understand that cameras are not going to see anything we can't. Now, not necessarily on the infrared or the ultraviolet spectrum. That's something different. But it's there. You're just illuminating it, like in a cemetery, here's the mist. And it's like, well, they put additives into the grass, and these things can tend to give off, organic material and things. You can't see it, but when you light it up with a camera, especially with the lenses this close to the flash,
right.
Those things are going to appear. So what
when
you do
falls across the screen or the camera lens,
strand of hair that becomes a vortex. Yeah. Yeah. But it's the thing that it's like, you got to keep doing what you're doing. And for what it's worth, a schmuck from Rhode Island like me and George down in Florida, we encourage you to just keep asking questions and what you're doing. And we love the documentary. We love the direction you're going in. And maybe we can break a mold and get away from this vacuum, this echo chamber that we have where people kind of repeat the same things. You go your own path is what I wish more people would do.
Right.
What's your guys' manifesto for that? What is your end game? As I said at the beginning of the show, you've proven that it happens. Is it the next evolution of how it happens, why it happens, when it happens? Is that where your next goals are in this level of experimenting?
I think what it comes down to is trying to figure out exactly what pieces of data correlate to give us the biggest view of what's happening, and to try to use that correlation to come up with some really good hypothesis of what's happening there. I don't know how we fully prove something. For me, science is always something suggesting something happened. To actually prove something, to me, is insanely hard. And I've invented stuff, and it's still hard for me to say I've proved much. I've found something and that suggests that this works, right? And so to me, really trying to push forward to find all the correlation points that we can, and then try to figure out that is, we found heat signatures and we found densification of some kind. And those are the two things we have right now. We've done some other experiments because we've started on the next documentary, and I've added a few things, like I said, to help see bigger spaces. And we've seen those things go in some spaces and no readings in some other spaces, so that's one or two more data points, and it's going to take a lot. Then to try to figure it out, but I don't know when we get there.
Ross, you're talking about not reinventing the wheel, but certainly putting better bearings in the system. And right now, and people talk about the evolution of touch, then becomes the emotional contact with the spirit, where they feel pain, they feel nausea, they feel emotions, all these things. So it really has degrees to it. And you guys are pinpointing the starting aspect of how the contact is being made. Miles to go before you sleep, my friends. I can tell you that.
Oh yeah, we're just at the beginning of the race.
Yeah.
Right now, there's always going to be more questions than there are answers. And as me and Chad work together, I have to respect his protocols as a scientist in helping to collect the right evidence to help us move forward. I get excited, when he's telling me there's data points, there's something to validate that. I'm like, oh my God, this is awesome. He's like, wait, this is good.
Yeah.
This is interesting, but it doesn't give us the answers that we're looking for. It just opens up more boxes.
Yeah.
And we have to rifle through all those boxes to find that one unique piece to say, hey, here's the answer.
That is sums it up in a nutshell, Ross, because we spend so much time on things that are obviously explainable or can be, rather than focusing on the small amount relatively that we don't have an explanation for. And that's what we should be focusing on. I think we can explain this. And let's get to the meat and potatoes of what it is that we're chasing around here.
Yeah. Ken, you wanted to bring this up as well, right?
Yeah, I want Ross to tell us a little bit about this excellent tour. I was reading a little bit about it, and you are killing it out there. Spooked in Seattle, which I think I have seen some clips of all you folks carrying on out there. So anybody on the West Coast, the Pacific Northwest, tell us a little bit about that endeavor, Ross.
Well, Spooked in Seattle was developed due to the fact that, I've always had a passion for the paranormal, for ghosts. And I travel a lot. I travel all over the world. And anytime I hit a major city, I'm always checking out the local ghost tour because I want to hear their ghost stories. I want to be able to check out their local haunts. And for the longest time, I kept finding that a lot of these tours were making up stories. And dramatizing, facts and everything. Because when I go to pursue this place and say, oh, I want to do a ghost hunt here, I've heard your stories on the ghost tour, and they tell me, oh, most of that's made up, or that's fake, or that never happened here. I was very let down. I was kind of upset that I paid money to hear a bunch of fake ghost stories. And so for me, I wanted to produce something that was based off of real research, real investigations that me and my team had done throughout Seattle. And so that became the origin for Spooked in Seattle. It was all based off of, this great evidence that I had. And so from there, it just kind of took off. We ended up, receiving a lot of awards, being one of the top ghost tours out there. And there's a lot of amazing ghost tours out there. Don't get me wrong. There are some good ones. But to be able to get out the word about Spooked in Seattle was great.
Guys,
tune in 2 weeks when I tell everybody why the Winchester Mystery House is not haunted.
We are all out of time here, guys. I can't thank you enough for joining us. We wish you the most successful future with your endeavors here. Again, the show, ParaSense, The Naked Experiments, available on every platform. You go to your TV, go to the search on your Roku, and you guys will be able to find it. Make sure you do check it out. Gentlemen, thank you again so much. We appreciate you joining us this evening. That's it for us, guys. We'll see you in 2 weeks back here on the show. You've been watching Dead Air Live on the Dead Air Full Spectrum channel. Have a good night.